Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to those of you in the Manor House and welcome to those of you watching from home. Just a quick message for those of you at home. It just will help us if you remain on mute throughout the presentation. We are recording the presentation today just so we can share it more widely for those people who haven't been able to be in the house today or to be on Zoom. So welcome everyone again. So I'm Sarah Thomas, I'm chair of the Manor House Trust. And as we're sort of moving towards the end of the year, I know we've got a little way to go yet, but we thought as this was the last coffee morning of 2023, we would do a bit of a review, a bit of a look back over 23 and a look forward to the next, well, 3 to 5 years of some of the plans we have in the Manor House Trust. So that's what I'm hoping to do this morning. But before we get into some of the detail, I thought it might be useful to show you some of the people who are involved with running the trust and running the house. And the first picture, which we all of course hate seeing pictures of ourselves, is a picture of the trustees of the Manor House board. Are you all right, Jenny? So some of the faces you'll probably be very familiar with, others you may not know so well, but I'm just going to tell you who they are. From the left is Jenna Holmes, then Roger Tilbrook, Daisy Johnson, Sir Rodney, myself, John Cockshott and Julia Richards. So those are the trustees of the board. On the board, we're also joined by Helen Kidman, who's chair of the Ilkley Civic Society, and by Councillor Catherine Cheetah, who's our link with the Town Council. And the board is also ably supported by Nick Robinson, the operations manager, and by Jodie Kendall, who's our finance lead. So that's the board. We are planning early in 2024 to appoint 2 new trustees. And so we will be coming out advertising for 2 new trustees to join the board, hopefully in 2024. This was our staff team picture, which was taken in the summer. And again, just to show you some of the individuals who we've employed very part-time, and all of these individuals, in fact, do work over and above their paid hours, who help run the house. This picture was taken before we'd appointed our new visitor engagement lead, Esther, and so we do need to do a new picture which does include Esther. But again, from the left is Alex Wild, who's one of the visitor engagement leads that some of you will know, then Nick Robinson. Behind Nick is Mandy Preston, who's our housekeeper and general all-round amazing person who turns her hands to whatever we ask her to do. Then Andrea Cheaton, who's events lead, and so Andrea helps particularly Nick and I put on events in the house, but has also taken on the role of volunteer coordinator recently, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And then on the far right is Sally Emery. That the work from those focus groups, one-to-ones and the online surveys has now created an action plan. The action plan was looked at and discussed in great detail by the board at the end of October, and that action plan is now coming out to the volunteers. So volunteers can see what the plans are, and those actions will start to take place during 2024. We've also appointed 3 new gardening volunteers, and you'll see the importance of that in a moment or two when we come to some more information. First one, if we look at January, the house was closed to the public, but we decided we were going to produce some installations in the house that could be looked at through the windows. So the first window, which is actually the window behind where we're sitting, was called A Nod to Narnia. We then had, through the second window was Rumbold's Giant visiting the Manor House. And the third window was called A Night in the Forest. And the reason why I felt these were a really good example to bring to talk to you today about was that they really showed the sort of collaboration we work with in the Manor House. We had volunteers working on the installations. The community loaned or gave us their artificial Christmas trees. We had local suppliers supporting us. We worked with a local artist who loaned us their beautiful wire sculptures, which we had in the Heritage Room. And we worked with local businesses for props, groups like the Playhouse, who loaned us the fur coats that sat in the wardrobe in Nod to Narnia. So it was a real collaboration of all of those parties, which I think is at the heart of what we do in the Manor House. So this was the installation team. It was extremely cold in the house that January. And so Mandy on the left, Mandy Preston, the housekeeper. In the middle is Tony Briggs, one of the stalwart volunteers at the Manor House, and me. And so this was us installing the installation during early January. Yeah, as I say, it was a little bit chilly. Moving on through the year, and actually this started in 2022 when the gardening team, led by Keith Appleyard, researched, designed, built and planted the medieval garden, which is up the side of the house. And if you haven't seen that medieval garden, maybe in the spring, do come and have a look at it. It really is quite amazing. The 3 trees that were planted in the garden were registered with the Queen's Green Canopy, which was part of the Platinum Jubilee in 2022. And it really has been a fantastic addition to the gardens around the house. And it was, if some of you will remember, an area of sort of scrub land. It was rather sort of had a lot of weeds in. So it's an amazing addition now to what we can offer. And of course, we were then delighted that Alan Titchmarsh, our patron, came later in the spring to open the gardens. And here we are having, as you see, it was a lovely day. And I think, Claire, you're in the front there. I don't know if you can see yourself. But it really was a lovely day with the Lord Mayor of Bradford came, as did the then Mayor of Ilkley as well. So it was a really lovely event. Moving on through the year, in May, we decided that the exhibition, the main exhibition in the house body, would be about life in medieval Ilkley. And we had a series of interpretation boards in this room talking about what life would have been like at that time in Ilkley. And we made some dressing up clothes for the children, which I know, looking around the room, we have volunteers here who helped create some of those dressing up clothes. And in the middle is Karen Hill, one of our volunteers, modelling one of the underdresses that was used for the mannequins that we had in the house. So again, a fantastic effort by a whole range of people to put that exhibition on. At the same time, we were very fortunate to host the first solo exhibition of Tanya Bentham. Tanya is an amazingly skilled embroideress, works particularly in a style of embroidery which was relevant at the time, medieval times. And so her exhibition was in the Western Gallery. And I don't know, did any of you come to see that exhibition? Oh, I see some nods around the room. It was quite amazing. Fantastic storytelling, very humorous, but beautiful craft as well. So it was a really lovely exhibition to host. And I think that has given Tanya a lot of confidence to go on and do other exhibitions elsewhere, which is fantastic. At the same time, Tanya loaned us some of her wonderful period costumes that she makes. And here are 2 of our volunteers modelling 2 of those costumes. And we had a fashion show upstairs in the Western. And there was something very magical about seeing those clothes in the house. They felt very right. As I say, it was lovely to see our volunteers dressed up in these wonderful costumes. Moving on, we then did maypole dancing, but in June. We were too busy in May to do maypole dancing, so we did it in June, very ably run by Alex Cockshott, with fiddle playing by Jeff Bowen. So a lovely afternoon. You can see the blue skies. It was just a perfect afternoon for that event. We welcomed the Playhouse again during August. I was slightly puzzled as to whether this was the right image, and I'm not sure that whether this was this year's or last year's image of Bard in the Yard, so apologies if it's actually the year before, but they came in August over the bank holiday. We had 2 sellout performances with the Playhouse, and we're starting to talk to the Playhouse about whether we might do possibly an evening performance in 2024. So that's still early discussions. moving on through the year, we were delighted to host the first Ilkley Arts Open exhibition. Ilkley Arts, you'll know, is one of our key partners here at the Manor House. And they, for the first time, put out a national call for submissions for their Open. They had hundreds of submissions. And from those submissions, they selected around 40, I think, or so, which were exhibited in the Western Gallery. And it was an extremely well-received exhibition of contemporary art. And again, I don't know if any of you managed to see it, but it really was extremely well curated and some beautiful work. At the same time, we also ran a second Creative Quarter weekend, which we ran in the beginning of October, coinciding with the Literature Festival. We ran the first Creative Quarter weekend in 2022, post-pandemic, very much to support the creative businesses around the area around the Manor House. So both local galleries, but also obviously the creative individuals who work from our cottages, and some other creative artisan makers, so that we could really celebrate the creativity in the town. It was well received again this year. We had hundreds of visitors in the house over that weekend. And we will look at doing it again next year, but maybe tweaking it slightly, maybe doing a slightly different offer. But I think it's a very good way of working alongside the Literature Festival, but also with all the creative businesses that operate around this area of the town. Yes, Jenny has a still. Is that right? You weren't making alcohol?
Only for making hydrosol.
Yes.
Which is, you kind of boil plants and it takes the water with the essential oil from the plant in an emulsion.
Give demonstrations then.
That's what I was doing.
I missed that.
So as I say, it was I think it was well received, and it was just a lovely way of supporting our local creative partners around the space. Moving on again, we were absolutely thrilled to be able to put on the first of our, we hope, series of exhibitions working in partnership with the museum in Coutances. As you know, Coutances is our twin town in Normandy. And I have to say, looking at Jenny again, who worked very hard to make this happen so that we were able to access digital files from the museum in Coutances about food rationing during the Second World War. And with those digital posters and some artifacts which they sent us, a small number, we then created in the Western a street scene with some of the posters that would have been around the town at that time, a French kitchen. This is our interpretation of a French kitchen, and the black market. And it was a lovely exhibition to design and curate. And we hope it's going to be one of a number that we will do in partnership. We hope we will be able to share some work we've done with Coutances, and hopefully again we will over time get another exhibition back from the museum in Coutances. So we will see. Early days, but a lovely partnership. And Sophie Beskamal, who is the curator at Coutances, was saying she was very jealous of our installation, which was a great compliment that we felt. So yes, so a lovely exhibition to have done. So finally, and a little bit, not quite yet, but we are, as you know, promoting at the moment some festive dining experience in the house. Again, just a different way of using the space when the house is closed to the public, working with our partners at Good Food Story. So that's a new thing for us. We're trialing it this year to see how it's going. I know we have a number of bookings made, so we're sure that will be a very successful and enjoyable event. But to say, this has just been a quick gallop through the year. We've obviously had the Solar Gallery having 3 different exhibitions across the year. They also exhibited in Jigsaw in the shop in the town as well, to promote the artist's work. We've had the Makers Fair is happening next weekend, I think. I'm just hesitating about the date. First weekend in December. We're doing the Ilkley Christmas Tree Festival again this year. And obviously we have all the regular events like the coffee mornings, the family fun, and the walks and talks that we do from the house. So a very packed year for 2023. It was a very busy year, but it was also a very challenging year financially. Probably like all of us, we felt the impact of the increase of cost of living. So what I wanted just to go on to talk about was a little bit about our grants and finances in 23. We were very fortunate to obtain a number of grants this year from Ilkley Roundtable and from Tesco Community Grant. We received some money to help us with our family learning and the work we're doing on that, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. The Town Council gave us a small grant towards a new bench for the courtyard and some additional planting, which was very, very gratefully received. We had a small grant from Bradford Council for our coronation activities we had in the house. And we finally managed to put on the LS29 and Made with Music relaxed gigs, which we'd had money given to us from the Co-op Community Fund, I think back in 2019. And that money came into the trust to run these relaxed gigs in the house for young people with additional needs. But unfortunately, as we had the money and we started to design what we were going to do, lockdown happened. And so we then lost that 2 years. And so finally, we managed to put those on in the summer of this year. They were fantastic. Everyone, the families really enjoyed them. We did one in the afternoon, and we did another in the early evening for some of the older young people. And they were very, very well received and great fun. So we're hoping we may well do more of those going forward. But the end of the financial year, I'll move on to the next slide. That might be best. I hope you can all see those numbers. So the numbers in brackets are deficits. So I think it's worth just commenting on these 2 years, 21 and 22, were are really outliers in a way, because if you remember, those were or certainly the fallover from 21, they were COVID years, they were lockdown years. And during that time, we received grants from the government as a rate-paying organisation. But of course, the house was closed. And so lots of the activity we would normally be doing, we weren't doing. We were doing stuff online, but not in the house. And so it meant that we actually had quite a healthy surplus that year because of that sort of unusual set of financial inputs because of COVID and the lockdown. And that affected also 22 to some extent. This year, this is the worst case scenario. The figure, we're obviously not at the end of the year yet. This doesn't the figure of 4,000 does not factor in the festive dining income. So we are hoping that by the end of the year, that figure will not be a £4,000 deficit. It will be probably half of that, which, considering the financial impact that our organisation has had, just like all of us have had in our own homes, is not as bad as it could have been. And we've obviously got plans afoot as to how we make sure we, in future years, clear the year with a surplus that we can then invest in other activities. So we have sitting in reserves about £74,000, which sit in reserve, of which about 7.5 are restricted funds. That simply means they're for particular purposes. The money's come in for particular events and activities, so we have to use them for that purpose. So a sort of quite shifting pattern of surplus and deficits over the last few years. But of course, we have gone through a very exceptional period of time with COVID. So what I wanted to do now was just talk a little bit about 2024 and beyond. And probably the first thing to say is that as we then, in this year, we've been running for a number of years, and we started to feel that we needed to perhaps revisit the purpose of the organisation. We obviously had, at the very beginning, set out our charitable aims, which sit on the Charity Commission website, but we decided we needed to collectively as a board really understand what it is we're trying to do as an organisation. And that work has gone on during 22 and also into 23. And it was supported by Museum Development Yorkshire. And that process led to a new mission statement. Now, I'm ambivalent about mission statements, I have to be honest. But I think what's most important about them is the process, the process of arriving at that set of words, because it means that everyone's had an input in the board into what we're here to do. And this is still very much a work in progress. And if people have got any issues with these words, then please do let me know. I'm going to read, this is the only slide with text on, so I am going to read it. So Ilkley Manor House is an important historic Grade 1 listed building that stands on the remains of a Roman fort and is at the heart of Ilkley on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales. We work to preserve the house and its gardens for future generations and to bring to life the story of Ilkley Manor House, its place in Ilkley, the local landscape and the wider world. Through our programmes of arts, cultural well-being and heritage activities, we will create connections with the community to explore stories, themes and objects from the past, present and future to bring the history of Ilkley Manor House to life. So that's where we've got to in terms of our overarching statement. We've also been doing some work, though this is still work in progress, as to why do we do that? Why do we spend time doing those very commendable things? And what we'd like to feel is that everyone who comes to the house, that's volunteers, staff, visitors, everyone who comes to the house will leave feeling their lives have been enriched in some way. Now, so I hope you'll leave today feeling enriched in some way. And it might be a very small thing. It might be how you're greeted by the visitor engagement lead. It might be spending some quality time with your grandchild doing an activity in the house, or learning a new piece of history, or looking at some lovely art. Whatever that means for you, that's what we'd like to feel people leave the house feeling. So that's the work that we've been doing. And from that, we now have developed a 5-year forward plan, which sits on the website. So if any of you are interested in reading it in detail, it sits there. And there are 5 main goals, and there they are. I'm not going to read those. And they're really what you would expect to see. It's making the manor house a good place to visit, to make it accessible, to look after it, make sure it's here for future generations, make sure we're making enough money and we're environmentally sustainable, and about developing those key partnerships. So that's the sort of broad brush of the strategic objectives we're working with. And obviously behind each of those is a detailed action plan and success criteria. And I'm sure you'll be delighted to hear I'm not going to take you through that detailed action plan. But if anyone is interested in seeing those as we develop those, we'd be very happy to share them. But there are probably just a few things I wanted to draw your attention to, some of the big pieces of work we're working on. The first is the visitor experience plan. This is really thinking about how do we make sure that visitors coming to the house have a really good experience. So that's right from making sure they find where we are, number one, what it's like when they come through that door, and how do we interpret and tell those stories in the house. And so that visitor experience plan is in very draft form at the moment. We've been working with a heritage consultant called Sarah Oswald to help us do that work. We've had a small working group being involved, and we're hoping that plan will be out for wider comment in the first quarter of 2024, so next year, beginning part of next year. But we're also going to probably try some things out. So we might try some changes, get comments and views from visitors as to whether they worked, and then respond to those. So it won't be, this is what we're doing, and it will simply be put in. We'll probably do some trial and error stuff along the way. We're also in parallel doing some work about our family learning and schools offer, again, working with some external expertise, a consultant called Amy Bagley. And Amy has been paid for in part by some of the monies we've had in from those grants I mentioned earlier on. Julia Richards is leading that work, and we have a small working group who is doing the work, who's starting to pull that together. And we've got another important meeting happening at the beginning of, well, middle of January. I think it's the 22nd of January. We're going to do some more work on that. And so again, that will then come out for people to look at and comment on. And again, we'll probably do some trial and error with that, try some different approaches, but probably key to that is developing a library, a resource library of activities of family learning pieces that we can use throughout the year. So again, another very important piece of work. Linking all the way back to those 3 additional gardening volunteers, some of you will know that when we took on the lease in 2018 for the Manor House, and when we became a trust in 2018, there were 2 leases that we signed. One was the short-term lease that we're currently operating at the moment. The second was the long-term 99-year lease, which was signed at the same time with Bradford Council. That 99-year lease incorporates us taking on land at the back of the house, all the way down to the first path, out and including the flower beds on New Brook Street, all the way up to and including the turning circle that sits beside the church. So that tract of land would be taken on as part of that 99-year lease. And our plan in the board is that we will do that. We will activate that 99-year lease probably in 2025. All the detail work is started now about additional negotiations with Bradford, but we probably will take it on in 2025. And the reasons for doing that are twofold. One, the Roman fort sits on that land, or sits under that land, and it will allow us to better interpret the Roman fort. And secondly, it will allow us to access grant funding. Our current lease would preclude us from applying for large grant funding because it's not long enough. Grant givers wouldn't give to an organisation that only had a lease running for another 2 or 3 years large sums of money. And so we need that long-term lease to be able to access significant grant funding, particularly for doing things like making the house more accessible, putting a lift in onto the house, which would mean we almost certainly would have to build onto the house, and to do that would obviously be quite a costly exercise. And to be able to do that, we need to have a long-term lease. So the gardening volunteers become quite important. Of course, we're not saying they're going to be managing all of this land. We're in negotiations with Bradford about what they continue to do in terms of lawn cutting, even though we have had several volunteers saying they would be happy to ride on the sit-on mower if we bought one. But nevertheless, there is a lot of land to look after, and we need to think about how we manage that sensibly.
I was just going to say, it'd be nice to think we would have access from the main road to come through.
Yes, exactly. Exactly,
Julia.
Julia. So there's, there are lots of opportunities, all of course with price tags, but still very, and those are some of the things we'd love to talk to volunteers and supporters in the town about. Well, what would people like to see to make the Manor House a really must-visit destination? So lots of opportunities with that land. We also are planning we're hoping that we will become an accredited museum with the Arts Council next year. This is a sort of industry standard which you need to show the Arts Council that you are behaving responsibly, you have processes and procedures in place to operate as an accredited museum. It also would allow us access to funding. As an accredited museum, there are some funds you can apply for that you can't if you're not an accredited museum. We had our assessment on Monday of this week, and we are cautiously optimistic that we will achieve that accreditation in next year. We'll know fairly early on in 2024 if we've been successful. And that work has been led by one of our trustees, Jenna Holmes, and it's been a lot of work to get us to this point. But as I say, we're cautiously optimistic that that will happen in the early part of 2024. So I think if we look at our 5-year budget forecast, there is still a gap between income and expenditure. And so one of our the focus we need to give to our financial sustainability is around income generation. And that's obviously things like donations and grants and supporters, but it's also about what I would say traded income, about how we can maximize the use of this fantastic asset we have, both the house and the gardens, to maximize our traded income. And but that comes at it's a complex balance between recognizing this space as a community asset, but also we need to make sure we're financially sustainable. So that's something that we are going to turn, well, we've been turning our attention to it throughout the year, but we're going to turn our attention with even more rigor to that process during next year, because that's the way we're going to be able to do some of the really wonderful things that I think all of us can imagine that the manor house being used for and the land around it. So in summary, headlines for 2024 and beyond: generate more income, but with that balance in mind, that we are a community asset. So it would be ridiculous if we closed every weekend for weddings, for instance, because clearly that's, you know, completely negating what the reason we were given the asset by Bradford Council. We're going to refocus some of the volunteering roles to make sure they're meeting the needs of volunteers and also the needs of the visitor experience plan, gaining museum accreditation, we hope, doing work on our visitor experience plan and the family learning offer. We hope that during those 5 years, we'll be able to open the house for longer. That, of course, is partly dependent on money, but hopefully opening maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Be interesting to hear your views on that, but also to improve accessibility. And that accessibility is in lots of different ways, but probably the most obvious is to allow access to the upper floors of the house. But that does demand a very significant capital investment to do that, hence taking on the 99-year lease. So that those things are inexorably linked. And we're saying probably in 2025 we'll do that. So that's just a very quick gallop through what we're hoping to do next year. And I know it's a little bit early, but we hope we'll see you in 2024. Well, I hope I'll see you before 2024. The Manor House closes for the winter on the 17th of December and reopens towards the end of February. We haven't yet finalised the reopening date, but we'll obviously make sure everyone knows it when we've finalised it. The spring programme will be out in January, and we'll obviously have full details on the website. But until then, I know, awful, but can I wish you all a very happy Christmas and a healthy and content 2024. So thank you very much for your attention this morning.